The day I signed my will, I watched my son slip his phone beneath the dining room table and tap out a message he thought I couldn't see. He smiled at me the whole time he was doing it. Thanks for watching. And send a thanks for watching. And I'll see in that I will. They will be our. The day I signed my will, ended quoting to message, that smile warm, practiced, the same one he'd been giving me since he was 17 and needed money. Didn't waver for even a second. But I had seen the screen. Just a glimpse. Just enough. It's done. He has no idea. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer. I have calculated load-bearing tolerances on bridges that carry thousands of cars every single day. I do not miss things, and I do not forget them, but I am getting ahead of myself. My name is not important. What matters is that I am a widower. My wife passed 4 years ago, quietly, on a Tuesday morning in October, while I was making her chamomile tea in the kitchen. By the time I walked back into the bedroom, she was gone. The doctors said her heart simply stopped. I have thought about that a great deal since then, the idea that a heart can just decide it has had enough. I understood it more than I let on. We had one child together. My son. He was 34 at the time of his mother's passing, already married to a woman I had never quite trusted, though I could never explain why, in a way that didn't sound like the complaint of a difficult father-in-law. She was polite. She remembered my birthday. She sent Christmas cards. But there was always something careful about her, the way you are careful around a chessboard, not around a person you love. After my wife died, my son called every day for about 3 weeks. Then it became every few days. Then Sundays. Then whenever something came up. The gap between his calls widened, the same way gaps always do when grief stops being dramatic and becomes just a quiet weight you carry. I didn't resent him for it. Grief makes people uncomfortable, and my son had always been a man who avoided discomfort wherever possible. What I did not know, what I would not fully understand until much later, was that those calls had a purpose beyond checking on me. They were reconnaissance. My wife and I had been careful with money our entire lives. We lived in the same house in Dayton for 26 years, a colonial, with a yard she loved and a basement I turned into a workshop. We drove practical cars. We took one real vacation every 3 years and spent the rest of our summers at a lake cabin 2 hours north that my father had built with his own hands. We did not live lavishly, but we saved consistently, invested conservatively, and by the time my wife died, the total picture was considerably more than most people would have guessed looking at our modest street. The house alone had appreciated to just over $400,000. There were retirement accounts, a small portfolio of index funds. The cabin, which had its own value entirely separate from what it meant to me emotionally. Altogether, it was the kind of number that changes how certain people look at you once they know it. My son found out the number at his mother's funeral. Not from me. From an aunt, who meant no harm and understood very little about the damage loose information can do in a grieving family. I did not know this either. Not then. What I did know, in the months after she died, was that my son started asking different kinds of questions. Gentle questions. Thoughtful-seeming questions. Questions about whether I'd thought about the future, about whether the house was too big for one person, about whether I'd considered getting my affairs in order. He said he was worried about me. He said he just wanted to make sure I was taken care of. He said his wife, my daughter-in-law, had a cousin who was a financial advisor and had helped a lot of older people structure things more efficiently. I listened. I nodded. I said I would think about it. I thought about it. Then I called my own attorney, a woman I have known for 22 years, who drew up the original will my wife and I made together when our son was in middle school. I told her about the questions. I told her about the financial advisor cousin. I told her about the careful smile my daughter-in-law wore whenever the subject of the house came up. My attorney listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always appreciated about her. Then she said, "Dennis, I want you to do something for me. Don't sign anything, and don't tell your son that you called me." That was 14 months before the day I watched my son text under the table. In those 14 months, my attorney and I moved quietly. We restructured everything through a revocable living trust that named her, not my son, as the successor trustee. We updated the beneficiary designations on every account. We had the cabin appraised and titled separately. We documented everything meticulously, with dates and witnesses and notarizations, because my attorney understood, as I was coming to understand, that the people most likely to challenge these arrangements would be people who knew me well enough to claim I hadn't been in my right mind. I was in my right mind. I am in my right mind. But I had started to see how easy it would be for someone to suggest otherwise, and how much damage that suggestion could do before it was proven false. I also did something my attorney did not advise me to do, but did not specifically tell me not to do. I started keeping notes. I wrote down dates and times, and exact words. I wrote down when my son visited and what he asked about. I wrote down the afternoon my daughter-in-law walked through my house with that careful look in her eyes and asked, very casually, whether I'd ever thought about what I'd do with my wife's jewelry. I wrote down the Sunday my son mentioned, just offhand, that his financial advisor cousin had a great track record with estate planning and that it might be worth just having a conversation. I wrote it all down. I kept the notebook in my workshop, behind a false panel I built into the wall when I renovated the basement 3 summers ago. My son didn't know about the panel. He had never been particularly interested in the workshop. The request to redo the will came in formally about 6 months ago. My son framed it carefully. He said his wife had been doing research, which I believed, because she was thorough, and that the will my wife and I had written years ago might not hold up well, given changes in tax law. He said it was just about protecting my assets. He said he wasn't trying to influence anything. He just wanted to make sure I was protected. I said that sounded reasonable and agreed to meet with his cousin, the financial advisor. My attorney came with me to that meeting. My son had not expected that. His cousin, a pleasant-looking man in an expensive shirt, who shook hands too firmly, recovered well, but not well enough. There were several moments during that meeting where he glanced at my son in a way that people glance at each other when a plan is not going the way they rehearsed it. After the meeting, my attorney told me what she believed they were trying to accomplish. It was not complicated. They wanted to have a new will drawn up, one that named my son as sole executor with broad discretionary powers, and they wanted to get it signed while framing it as a routine update. The cousin would handle the paperwork. My son would handle me. I asked my attorney what she recommended. She said we had 2 options. We could simply decline, which would protect me but would leave things unresolved and my son suspicious. Or we could let them believe it was working, attend the will signing, go through the motions while ensuring that none of what they were trying to accomplish actually took effect. I chose the second option. I have always found it more satisfying to let a structural problem reveal itself than to patch it from the outside. The will signing was scheduled for a Saturday morning at my son's house. My daughter-in-law made coffee and set out a plate of pastries from the bakery near their apartment. The cousin arrived with a leather portfolio. My son wore a collared shirt, which he rarely does on weekends, and shook my hand at the door like he was greeting a business associate. I noticed all of it. I also noticed that the documents the cousin slid across the table were not the documents my attorney and I had reviewed the week before. They were similar. They had most of the same language, but there were differences, small ones, technical ones, the kind of differences that only matter a great deal later. In court, I read every page, slowly. My son made a comment about how I was always so thorough. He said it like a compliment. It wasn't. I signed where they asked me to sign. The cousin witnessed and notarized. My son looked at his wife across the table. She looked back. Something passed between them. Relief, I think. The particular relief of people who have been waiting a long time for something to finally go their way. That was when my son picked up his phone from the table and, in the same motion of setting it back down, slid it briefly beneath the table's edge. A practiced move. The kind you rehearse. It's done. He has no idea. I drank my coffee. I complimented my daughter-in-law on the pastries. I let my son walk me to my car and hug me at the driver's door, the way he had not done since he was a teenager. He told me he loved me. I told him I loved him too. Both of those things were true, and neither of them meant what either of us needed them to mean right then. I drove home. I called my attorney from the driveway. "It's done," I told her. The exact same words. "He has no idea." She laughed. It was the first time I had heard her laugh in 14 months. Here is what my son did not know. The documents he had signed me through that morning were legally valid. They were properly witnessed and notarized. They said exactly what his cousin had written into them. But they were also entirely superseded by the trust documents that had been filed 7 months earlier, which restructured my estate in a way that no subsequent will could override without a specific legal challenge. A challenge that would require proving, in court, that I had been incompetent or coerced at the time of the original filing. I had not been incompetent. I had not been coerced. I had been, if anything, more deliberate than I had ever been in my life. The will they had me sign that Saturday morning was real. It just didn't matter. For 3 months after that, I watched. My son called more frequently again. His wife texted to check in. They invited me for dinner twice, which was twice more than they had in the previous year. I went. I was pleasant. I brought wine, because I have always brought wine. And I listened to them talk about their plans, vague plans, careful plans, the kind of plans you make when you are waiting for something to be confirmed before you commit to anything out loud. I had spent 31 years reading the stress in structures that hadn't failed yet. I had learned that the moment before, a failure is often the quietest one. Everything looks stable. Everything holds. And then it doesn't. The moment came on a Wednesday evening in March. My son called me. Not on a Sunday. He said there was something he wanted to discuss. He said he and his wife had been talking, and they thought, given my age, given the size of the house, given how much maintenance it required, it might make sense for me to think about selling. He said they knew a realtor. He said the market was good right now and they had actually looked into a few things already, just to get a sense. I asked what kind of things. He paused. Then he said they had looked into a senior living community, about 40 minutes away. Very nice, he said. Good amenities. A lot of people in my situation had found it really improved their quality of life. My situation, I said. He said he just meant people who were living alone in a big house. I was quiet for a moment. Outside my window, the yard my wife had planted was starting to come back from the winter. The crocuses she put in along the fence line 20 years ago were pushing up through the half-frozen ground. I had not touched that fence line since she died. I don't touch it because I don't know what I'm doing out there, and I don't want to get it wrong. I told my son I appreciated his concern. I told him I would think about it. Then I called my attorney. She had anticipated this. She said it was a common next step. Once people in this situation believed the legal groundwork was in place, they often moved to the practical phase. The house would be the next conversation. Then, the accounts. Then, gradually, everything else. She asked me how I wanted to handle it. I said I was ready. We scheduled a meeting for the following Saturday. My son and his wife, my attorney and me. I told my son it was to discuss some estate updates and that I wanted everyone in the room together. He was enthusiastic. He confirmed twice. He told me he was glad I was being proactive. They arrived at my house 10 minutes early. My daughter-in-law had dressed up slightly, which she did not usually do for casual visits. My son had a folder with him that he set on the coffee table, which I found interesting since I had not asked him to bring anything. My attorney arrived exactly on time. My son's expression when he saw her just for a moment, just a flicker, was the expression of a man who had done a mental calculation and come up with the wrong answer. We sat in my living room. My attorney had her own folder, which was considerably thicker than my son's. She placed it on the table beside his. I let her speak first, because she is better at this than I am, and because I have learned over 67 years that the person who speaks first in a difficult conversation is usually the one who controls its direction. She explained, methodically and without any particular emotion, the structure of the trust. She explained the timeline of its creation. She explained what it covered and what it did not. She explained, very clearly, that the will my son had arranged to have signed 3 months earlier had no practical effect on the distribution of my estate, because the trust predated it and superseded it in all the ways that mattered. My daughter-in-law went very still. My son looked at the folder in front of him as if he was calculating whether it still had any use. Then my attorney said something I had not heard her say in 22 years. She said that if any attempt was made to challenge the trust, or to pursue any legal or extra-legal action regarding my property, my accounts, or my personal autonomy, she was prepared to provide documentation, dated, witnessed, and comprehensive of every conversation, visit, and communication that had occurred over the past 14 months. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. My son looked at me. I looked back at him. He had his mother's eyes, which I had always considered a gift, and which now felt like something else. Something more complicated. He said, quietly, that he had just been trying to help. I told him I knew. I told him that the desire to help and the desire to control can look identical from the outside, and that I had spent the past year trying to understand which one he felt. I told him I was not angry. I told him I was something worse than angry, which was disappointed in a way I had not expected to be, because I had raised him in a house where we did not take things from people, not even things we thought we deserved, not even things we told ourselves we were owed. My daughter-in-law said nothing during any of this. She sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance, which told me that she understood exactly what had happened and was already thinking about the next thing. I told them both that they were welcome in my house. They would always be welcome in my house. But the house was mine. It had been mine for 26 years, and it had been filled with something they had underestimated the value of, which was not the square footage, or the appreciated market value, or the favorable location. It was 31 years of a life my wife and I had built together, starting with nothing except the willingness to be honest with each other about what we were and what we wanted and what we were afraid of. My wife had been afraid of being left. I had been afraid of being lied to. I looked at my son when I said that last part. He understood. I could see it land on him the way true things land. Not like an accusation, but like a weight you suddenly realize you've been carrying without knowing its name. He did not argue. He did not open his folder. He and his wife left about 20 minutes later. My daughter-in-law picked up her coat without looking at me. My son hugged me at the door, briefly, the way you hug someone when you have run out of the kind of language that makes hugs make sense. After they left, my attorney and I sat at the kitchen table and drank the coffee I had made before they arrived. She told me I had handled it well. I said I wasn't sure I'd handled it at all, that mostly I had just waited and watched and written things down. She said that was usually enough. I have thought a great deal in the week since about what I want the rest of my life to look like, not in a morbid way. In the way you think about a structure, once you've confirmed its foundation is sound, you start to think about what you want to build with the stability you have. I am going to stay in my house. I am going to keep not touching the crocuses along the fence because I do not want to get them wrong. I am going to keep my workshop and the notebook behind the false panel and the habit of writing things down because it turns out that the most important thing I built in 31 years as an engineer was not any bridge or building. It was the discipline of paying attention to what I could actually see rather than what I hoped was there. My son called 2 weeks after the meeting. He called on a Sunday, which was when he used to call. He asked how I was doing. I told him fine. He asked about the yard. I told him the crocuses were coming in. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said his mother had loved those crocuses. I said I knew. He said he was sorry. I didn't ask him to be more specific about what he meant by that, and he didn't offer. Some things don't need to be more specific. Some things just need to be said. I told him I'd talk to him next Sunday. He said okay. I hung up and went out to the yard. I stood at the fence line for a long time, looking at what she had planted. The crocuses were small and purple and very certain about what they were doing, which I have always found remarkable, the way some things know exactly what they're meant to be. Even in the cold, even before anyone tells them it's time. I am 67 years old. I am a widower. I am a retired engineer. I am a man who keeps notes in a notebook behind a false panel, and who knows the difference between a load-bearing wall and one that only looks like it's holding something up. I did not lose my house. I did not lose my accounts or my cabin or the jewelry my wife left in the cedar box on her dresser, which I have not opened since October 4 years ago, because I am not ready, and I will open it when I am. What I almost lost, and what I think about more than any of the rest of it, was the version of my son I had been choosing to see for 34 years. The version I built in my mind from better materials than the ones he sometimes gave me. A father does that. A father takes whatever he has to work with and engineers something stronger than the source material. It is not deception. It is hope. And hope, I have decided, is worth keeping, even when it needs to be restructured, even when the blueprints have to be redrawn. He called last Sunday too, and the Sunday before that. He has not mentioned the house again. He has not mentioned the financial advisor, cousin, or the senior living community, or the will that doesn't matter anymore. He asks about the yard and the workshop and occasionally about what I'm eating for dinner, which is the kind of question his mother used to ask, and which I suspect he asks now because some part of him remembers that it made her feel close to someone. I answer him honestly. I always have. That is the one thing I did not have to engineer. The one thing that did not require a trust document, or a backup plan, or a notebook hidden behind a wall. I told him the truth because I am his father. And because some structures, the ones that matter most, have to be built from honesty, or they will not hold. Not against weather, not against time, not against the particular kind of pressure that only family can apply. Because only family knows exactly where you are weakest and what it would take to make you fall. I did not fall, and I am still here, in my house, on my street, in the yard my wife made beautiful, watching what she planted come back one more time from the cold.